Inside a small, pretty apartment in a quiet residential area on the outskirts of Seattle. Hello everyone, let's listen to the story of Mary. Mary, a 27-year-old girl, with long, naturally flowing black hair, sitting cross-legged, holding a bag of potato chips. Next to her, Busa, her best friend from college, was silently staring at the coffee cup on the table. Daddy, the friendly golden retriever, slept between the two, occasionally rubbing his head against Mary's leg, demanding attention. This was a familiar evening that they had spent. After a long day of work, Mary always enjoyed relaxing time with Busa. The two often talked about everything in this space, from memories of their college days and favorite movies. But tonight, everything seemed different. Busa didn't talk as much as usual. He just sat there, his back leaning forward, his hands clasped together. His eyes looked over at the TV screen that was showing a comedy show. Mary said, "Don't you find this show funny?" Mary was silent, asked as she put a piece of potato chip in her mouth. Busa chuckled, but it wasn't his usual cheerful smile. "Yeah," he replied, but his voice was lower, as if he were deep in thought. Mary tilted his head to look at him, his eyes slightly narrowed. "Come here," she called to the dog as a way to break the strange atmosphere. Dog immediately sat up, wagging his tail happily, then climbed up to lie between them. Mary gently stroked the dog's back, his eyes never leaving Busa. "What's wrong, Busa? You've been quiet all night. It's not like you at all." Busa looked at her, his brown eyes filled with something indescribable. He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something but stopped himself. I answered, "Nothing. It's just, I'm thinking a little." But it was clearly not true. In the cozy space, Mary clearly felt something was changing, like an invisible cloud hovering between them. She didn't want to force Busa, but his silence made it impossible for her to shake off her feelings of curiosity and anxiety. Daddy sighed, resting his head on Busa's leg, as if trying to comfort him. Mary smiled at the dog's innocence, but that smile was not enough to dispel the anxiety in her heart. In the living room space that still remained tense, Busa sat quietly, his eyes looking at his hands, as if trying to gather all the courage to speak. Mary still sat beside him, his hand fondling a half-eaten bag of potato chips. Daddy, the loyal golden retriever, lay on the sofa, raising his head to look back and forth between the two, as if he could also sense the difference. "Busa, what's really wrong with you? You're not the type to brood like this," Mary repeated, her voice softer this time, as if to encourage. Busa took a deep breath, sitting up straight, her hands clasped together in her lap. "Mary, I think I've kept this in for too long." He paused, his eyes meeting hers, deep and full of emotion. "We've been through so much together. But I don't know if things between us are still the same as before." Busa's words made Mary pause. She put the bag of potatoes down on the table, her eyes looking at him intently. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice soft but unable to hide her curiosity. Busa paused, as if trying to find the right way to resolve it. "I don't know how to describe it, but my feelings for you are not just friendship anymore." He lowered his head. Mary didn't say anything, just felt every word he said, every emotion lingering in the space between them. Daddy stretched, gently placing his head on Busa's leg, like a silent encouragement. "So, you're saying that you have other intentions?" Mary spoke, but her voice was lost. Busa looked up, his eyes filled with rare sincerity. "I think I'm in love with you, Mary. And that scares me. Because I don't know how you feel. I'm afraid of losing what we have." The room fell silent. Busa's words were like a strong wind that disturbed the peaceful atmosphere. Mary looked at him, her heart filled with indescribable emotions. She couldn't deny that his words made her heart skip a beat, but at the same time, they also made her confused. She began, but didn't know what to say next. Daddy barked softly, breaking the heavy moment. Mary reached out to stroke the dog's head, trying to organize her thoughts. "Busa, this isn't what I expected. I need time to understand my own feelings." Busa said, his voice trembling but sincere. Mary nodded, as if she had anticipated the answer. I understand. I just need you to know that, Busa. Whether you respond or not, I'll still be here, like always. His last words made Mary's heart sink. She didn't know what to say, just smiled slightly to reassure him. Daddy yawned loudly, then stood up, walked over to Mary, and rubbed his head against her hand. The moment lightened the mood a bit, but what Busa had just said still echoed in her mind. Busa's eyes, filled with hope mixed with a bit of worry, were still imprinted in Mary's mind as the two sat back on the sofa. With the dog lying between them, the atmosphere had calmed down, but it was clear that their relationship had taken a major turn. The lights in the living room gradually dimmed as the wall clock struck nearly 10 p.m. The quiet but heavy atmosphere still prevailed. Busa stood up, pulled up his sleeves a bit, and glanced at the dog. The dog was still lying between the two of them. The dog raised its head, its round eyes looking at him, its tail wagging slightly, as if sensing his hesitation in his actions. Busa, are you going to leave? Mary asked, her voice unable to hide a hint of hesitation. Busa turned back, his hand still resting on the arm of the sofa, as if not ready to leave. He looked at her, his eyes sparkling with emotion but still tinged with sadness. Yeah, it's late. I don't want to bother you anymore. Mary started to say something, but stopped, unsure of what to do. Before she could react, Daddy jumped down from the sofa, rushing to stand in front of Busa, as if to stop him from leaving. The sight made them both laugh softly, but Busa's smile was tinged with an indescribable sadness. See, even the dog doesn't want you to go, Mary said, trying to make a joke to dispel the tension. Busa bent down to pet the dog, who eagerly wagged his tail and licked his hand. A gentle moment appeared between the three of them, as if everything had returned to normal. But only a few seconds later, Busa straightened up, his eyes meeting Mary's for the last time. I think I need to give you some time, he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. But I hope, in the meantime, you'll think about what I said. Mary sat still, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. Busa's words, though gentle, still made her heart ache. I'll think about it, she replied, her voice uncertain, but sincere. Busa smiled, a fleeting but meaningful smile. He walked to the door, turning back slightly before stepping out completely. Dog, keep an eye on her, he said to the dog. Daddy responded with a small bark, like a promise. The door closed, leaving Mary and the dog in the familiar space that now felt different. Mary sighed, leaning back in her chair, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Daddy stepped closer, resting his head on her leg, as if to comfort her. He's right, dog, she said softly, stroking the dog's head. Everything is different. But is it better? Daddy only responded with a warm head rub, but that made Mary feel a little better. Although she couldn't answer her own question, she knew that Busa's words had planted a seed in her heart, a seed that she couldn't ignore. One afternoon a few days later, the pale late autumn sunlight filtered through the large windows, illuminating the cozy living room. Mary was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a woolen blanket, holding a book in her hand, but her eyes weren't focused on the words. Ever since that night, her mind had been spinning with thoughts of Busa's words. The dog lay at her feet, its ears pricked up as if waiting for something. Suddenly, the dog jumped up and ran towards the door. The sound of its tail wagging against the door and an eager bark signaled the arrival of a familiar guest. Mary put down the book, feeling her heart beat faster. She opened the door and, as she expected, there stood Busa. He was wearing a black leather jacket, his deep brown eyes looking at her with a mixture of shyness and determination. Hello? He said, his voice low but not without tension. Hello, Busa, Mary replied, stepping back to let him in. The dog immediately jumped onto Busa, making him laugh and pat the dog's head affectionately. When the three of them sat down on the sofa, the air became quiet. Busa petted Daddy, his eyes glancing quickly at Mary. He took a deep breath, as if mustering the courage to say something. Mary, I know I probably shouldn't have rushed this, but I couldn't help but come back to ask you something. He paused, his eyes fixed on her. Have you thought about what I said? Mary felt her throat dry. The dog sat between them, tilting its head as if listening curiously to the conversation. She nodded slightly, trying to find the words to express her feelings. I've been thinking a lot, she began, her voice shaking slightly. I don't know how to say it, but you've made me realize that maybe I don't see you as a friend anymore. Busa looked at her, his eyes lighting up, but he remained silent, letting her continue. There's one thing I have to change, Mary continued. But I need more time to understand it better. I'm afraid if we cross this line, we won't be able to go back to the way we were before. Busa smiled softly, a gentle and soft smile. I understand. I'm not in a hurry. Just thinking about it is enough. The dog, as if sensing the tension between them, jumped onto the sofa, squeezed between them, and rubbed its head against Mary's hand. They both laughed, and the atmosphere between them became lighter. Busa, Mary said after a moment of silence, are you always this patient? With you, I can wait a lifetime, he replied, his voice sincere. In that moment, although there were still many things unclear, there was a special connection between them, with the dog as a warm bridge, helping them face their true feelings. That evening, the lights in the living room were warmer than usual. Busa was still sitting on the familiar sofa, his eyes no longer filled with worry, like the previous times. Instead, there was a gentle, steadfast, yet still waiting look. The dog, as usual, lay right between the two of them, its head resting on Mary's leg, its eyes half closed, half awake, as if to make sure everything was okay. Mary leaned back in the chair, feeling a rare peace amidst the chaotic thoughts of the past few days. She reached out to pet the dog, her fingers touching the soft fur as if seeking reassurance from the loyal dog. Mary, Busa spoke, breaking the silence. He leaned towards her, his voice low and gentle. I know you have many doubts, and I understand. But I want you to know that, to me, you will always be special. I don't need an answer right now. I just need you to know that my feelings are real. Mary turned to look at him, her eyes wavering between shyness and sincerity. She bit her lip, trying to find the words, but instead she felt her hand touch something warm. It was Busa's hand. He didn't pull away. They were both silent, no words needed, just each other's presence and the soft breathing of the dog. Busa gently placed his other hand on her shoulder, gentle and steady. Sometimes, I think if you weren't here, things would be different, Mary admitted, her voice small but clear. Busa smiled slightly, a smile not of immediate joy, but of relief at realizing she was ready to take the next step. He said nothing, just leaned down, the distance between them gradually closing. Their first kiss was natural, unhurried. Everything around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them and the bond that was forming. The dog, noticing this moment, just sighed softly and buried his head deeper into Mary's chest, as if reassured that they had finally found the answer to each other. Mary and Busa separated after a few seconds, both blushing, but in their eyes, there was nothing to hide. Shall we try? Mary said, revealing a hesitant but hopeful smile for the first time. We will do this together, Busa replied, his eyes shining. That evening, the three of them, Mary, Busa, and the dog, sat together on the old sofa, without saying much. Small actions, gentle looks, and the presence of the dog as a perfect bridge helped them start a new journey, no longer as ordinary friends, but as kindred spirits entering a relationship with absolute sincerity. The soft light from the night light in the corner of the room spread throughout the space, making everything warmer and closer. On the familiar sofa, Mary, Busa, and the dog curled up together. It was late, but neither of them wanted to leave. The dog, lying between them, breathed evenly in his sleep, his ears perking up at the slightest noise from outside. Mary rested her head on Busa's shoulder, feeling his warmth, something she never thought would become so familiar. His hand rested gently on hers, not too tight but enough to let her know that he was here, by her side, and always would be. This evening is strange, Mary whispered, breaking the comfortable silence. Strange in a good way or a bad way? Busa replied, her voice low and gentle. Good, Mary said, raising her head slightly to look at him. I never thought you and I would be sitting here like this, as a couple. Things have changed so quickly. But it's natural, Busa replied, his eyes fixed on hers, as if to make her understand that this was not something he had decided hastily. I think we've been waiting for this for a long time, we just didn't realize it. Mary fell silent, her heart filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name for Busa. There was a relief in her heart, a sense that things were finally going in the right direction, even if it wasn't the direction she had originally planned. The dog, rubbing its head against Mary's leg, reminded her that the dog was always there, witnessing everything. Mary smiled, reaching out to stroke the dog's soft fur. What do you think the dog will do if we don't make it? She asked, half joking. Busa laughed. I think the dog is our biggest supporter. If we do something wrong, he will fix everything. That night, as the three of them fell asleep on the narrow sofa, none of them felt deprived. The dog lay between them, like a warm bridge, keeping everything perfect. For Busa and Mary, the relationship of the two people sitting together at night, what do you think will happen? Busa and Mary had a relationship together. Crossing the line and satisfying through one night, they made the world more complicated than ever but also full of love. The gentle morning light shone through the window, signaling a new day. The dog yawned, jumped up, and rubbed its head against the two sleeping people. Mary opened his eyes, looked at Busa, a smile appearing on his lips for being the wonderful woman Busa kissed. This was not just a new day, but a new beginning, where the three of them would walk together with faith and connection. The morning in the small town seemed to be covered with a layer of typical peace. The paved roads ran between the trees that had shed their late autumn leaves. The air was cool and airy, like an invitation to leave the apartment to enjoy the new day. Mary, Busa, and the dog decided to spend the afternoon walking around the Central Park, a place the three of them often visited on their free days. The dog ran happily ahead, wagging its tail happily whenever it saw a bird perched on the fence or another dog playing. Busa and Mary walked slowly behind, their hands lightly touching each other as a natural action. Neither of them said it, but they both felt the familiarity deepen. Remember this place? Busa asked as the three of them passed a large oak tree in the corner of the park. Mary stopped, looking up at the spreading yellow leaves. How could I forget? This is where we sat all afternoon when we first came to this town. Do you remember the dog, only a few months old, playing with the leaves so much that he wouldn't come back? Busa laughed. Yes, and I had to carry him all the way home. You just stood there laughing. They both laughed, their eyes meeting in a moment that they both understood their pasts were full of memorable memories, and now, new ones were being written. They chose to sit under the large oak tree, where the dog quickly lay down in the middle, panting after running around all afternoon. Mary rested her head on Busa's shoulder, her eyes following the flow of people in the park. It's weird, she said, breaking the silence. Strange how? Busa asked, his eyes soft on her. It feels like everything's changing, but not changing. I feel more comfortable with you, but at the same time, things are getting complicated. Busa nodded slightly, as if agreeing with her. I guess that's how relationships work. But you know what? I don't mind complications, as long as we can get through them together. On the way home, Mary held Busa's hand tightly, her eyes sparkling under the deep blue sky. Do you think we can keep these days going? Busa squeezed her hand tighter. We'll try, Mary. With Daddy by our side, I think we can. On the way home, the Seattle sky was more magical than ever. The stars twinkled across the night sky, creating a quiet scene that was hard to stop and admire. There was only the sound of Mary and Busa's slow footsteps, and the soft wag of the dog's tail as he walked beside them. Look, the sky is beautiful tonight, Mary said, pointing up at the bright stars. Busa nodded. Yeah. I remember the last time we saw the sky like this was in college. That night you talked about your dreams. Mary chuckled. I remember. I said I wanted to travel, explore the world. But then I chose to stay here, a small town, a steady job. And I'm glad you did, Busa said, his voice warm and sincere. Otherwise, I wouldn't have you here right now. They walked a few more steps in silence. The dog walked between them, occasionally darting out in front, then turning back as if to make sure they were still there. Busa, Mary said, her voice hesitant. How do you think things will change from now on? I mean, between us? Busa paused, turning to face her. The dim light from the street lamps illuminated his face, but his eyes were bright, full of sincerity. Things will change, Mary. But that's not a bad thing. The important thing is that I'm not going anywhere, and we'll get through anything together. You don't have to worry. Mary looked at him, her heart softening. I believe you, she said softly, and couldn't help but smile. They continued walking, with the dog running wildly ahead. Under the starry sky, the three of them didn't need to say another word. Everything was clear. A new future was opening up before them, with love, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond. It was not only a promise between the two of them, but also a promise, the dog who had understood in their story. The story is the journey from friendship to love between Mary and Busa, with the dog, the loyal dog, as the emotional bridge. From a peaceful evening, Busa's confession opened up deep vibrations in Mary's heart. Through sincere and challenging moments, they realized their feelings for each other and decided to cross the line of broken marriage in just one night. Under the starry sky, the promise to face the future together, with the dog always by their side, affirming a lasting relationship, a blend of love, loyalty, and hope. Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Please don't miss the real stories that follow.